Welcome to PhD with Woman on It, Hack the Future. My name is Beata Young, and today's PhD Positivity Hack delivered will be by Pamela Kellert. Topic: Ladies to Leaders Thriving in STEM. Episode 104 starts here. Let me remind you, this is a grassroots community that focuses on women on IT, an inclusive forum of women in technology, startups, and female leaders who are supported by men as well. And I bring heart to that hustle because empathy is my motto, and empathy is critical when you are thriving in STEM. Let me just remind you what's been happening in the world of technology last week. Congratulations to the corporate vice president and general manager of Next Generation Systems and Standards, Asha Keddy, for winning the innovation category of the WeQual Awards in the Americas. Kudos to Sargent and Landis for sponsoring and donating 2000 to Argonne National Labs Women in Science and Technology in a recent Science Careers in Search of Women conference held last May. May you inspire more young women to pursue careers in the science world. And speaking of the science world, let's go back to ladies to leaders thriving in STEM. As the world becomes increasingly reliant on technology and innovation, the need for diverse leadership in STEM fields has become more important than ever. However, women in STEM still face numerous challenges when it comes to advancing into leadership roles. Unlocking authentic leadership is key to helping diversity succeed in STEM. Learn how to lead from an expert in developing female leadership talent. Pamela Kellert helps female professionals in STEM sectors thrive in leadership roles. She's a seasoned strategic leadership expert with over 16 years' experience working in strategy, business development, and project delivery, heading diverse teams at leading organizations across Australia, Asia, Europe, and North America. As a leadership coach, Pamela supports women at multiple experience levels to lead effectively and authentically. Pamela, where in the world are you today? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Beata. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and your audience. Thank you so much for inviting me. Today, I'm actually dialing in from Germany, where I've been now living for the last 1.5 years again.
You're calling in from near Stuttgart, as I recall. I'm joining you from not that far because this time around I'm calling from Torun, the birthplace of Nicolaus Copernicus, that famous astronomer from a long, long time ago.
Mhm.
However, he built quite a strong leadership and strong brand, and I wanted to ask you, is there a one way to build your leadership, or are there different avenues that you can recommend for women in STEM?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, and you actually just mentioned two things that I would love to pick up as I speak through. Namely, you mentioned a leadership brand and you mentioned leadership. And a lot of what we portray, whether it's us as leaders or as a brand, it's really about what's inside of us. So, leadership, what I always say is it's something that starts within ourselves. Because when we lead people, whenever we lead through situations or through projects, we lead with priorities. We lead through certain ways. And that way of how we go about things that really is strongly driven, for example, by our values. So I always recommend that if we want to become leaders, it's really a good starting point to have time to reflect about ourselves and to increase our self awareness. And there are a couple of areas I would recommend looking into. One is, what are your values? What are the things that are important to you? How do you want to lead people? the second aspect that's also really important is to have a think about what are your strengths. Because you see, we all have very different strengths. In fact, it's really difficult to find people who have the exact same strengths alike. So when we are in tune with our strengths and with the topics that we're really good at and that we can use in our leadership skills and apply it in our leaderships, that's when we can also become more authentic with ourselves. And that authenticity is something that then shines through in the way we act, that shines through in the way we communicate, and ultimately builds our persona and our brand. So those are the two areas that I would recommend to start with. And I'll give you one example, namely, for example, one of my guiding values is respect. And respect can be really seen in everything that I do, the way that I communicate with people, the way that, for example, I negotiate contracts with partners. So that's just to give you one example of how our values can shine through in every interaction.
Hmm. Well, you touch upon many avenues here. I want to ask you about that persona, or you said about using your values as a way to drive people towards you.
Yeah,
But we know that there are different types of leadership.
yeah.
There is a strong type, there is a more kind of softer type. What way do you recommend us work around? And I'll give you an example. I
Yeah.
spoke to somebody who was very young in her career, and she became a CEO of a startup,
Mm-hmm.
and she was going through a mentorship program,
Mm-hmm.
and she was really frustrated because she was told she's too soft,
Mm-hmm.
and she was told to be harsher and to give orders.
Mm-hmm.
And after months and months of frustration, because it wasn't her style, it wasn't her, she decided, no, this is it. I'm not going to be somebody I'm not, and I'm
Yeah.
going to apply what I believe. So, what's your take on that?
Yeah. Oh, Beata, you know what? This is actually a classic example of some of the advice that women receive. Even I myself, I have received that early on my leadership journey, the advice to be more assertive. So the question is, what does that mean? What does it mean to be more assertive? Does it mean I need to bang on the table? Or like you said, does it mean someone needs to be stronger? And the problem with that advice is the following: if there's no differentiation of how to make that assertiveness congruent with who we are, with our personality, then we create a conflict. So if I'm someone who doesn't want to be, let's say, aggressive or competitive, then maybe a style or a recommendation from someone who tells me just be stronger, be more assertive or more aggressive, it's not going to work because it's not congruent with ourselves. So what I suggest is that we just try to break down what assertiveness means and also how we can make it work for us women. Because I think one misconception about being assertive is that maybe we should be loud or maybe we should be aggressive. But that's not what it means. I believe that being assertive means to be firm in the content that we communicate, to be firm in the position. Yeah? So, my position, I can declare my position very confidently and say, this is my position. Can we come to an agreement? And the way we can adjust that position and the communication is in how we communicate it, because we can determine which communication style we want to use, and that can be something that's really much more authentic to ourselves, to the way we communicate. You know, other people will might communicate in a bit more softer tone or more collaborative tone, but then the content, the position can still be firm. So that's one way of how I can reconcile a collaborative communication way, but still remain firm in the position.
Right. I would look at it as a perfect recipe for great leadership. But we know that there might come out gingerbread, or at one stage you may have soft cake, or you might have pancake. There is no one style that fits all. But what are the key ingredients to make a good leadership potential?
Yeah, I would say there are three main ingredients, and I've mentioned the first one before. The first one is really about understanding ourselves, understanding what are my values, what are my strengths, how do I approach leadership, because there are various ways how to approach leadership. The second aspect is actually leadership in itself, and I would suggest that we can break it down into three areas, which is namely about how do I lead myself, and I'll explain a little bit more. How do I lead myself? How do I lead my team, where I might have a reporting line? And how do I lead others, other stakeholders, where there's no reporting line, where there might be, we call that leadership without authority. So that's where we play with all of the leadership skills. And so when it comes to leading ourselves, that's really about leading, managing our time and priorities, and managing our energy as well. Because as a leader, we will face challenges. That's a given, right? Whether the challenges come from the market, from projects that suddenly result difficult. So there are many challenges that come towards us. So we actually need to maintain a clear mind in order to find a solution for that. In terms of leading people with or without authority, there's really a strong emphasis on empathy. And I like that you mentioned empathy at the beginning, because if we want to take people on a journey with us, we also need to understand how do we motivate them to come with us on this journey? How do we bring the best out in them? How do we help them in their development so that they see that they can make a contribution to the bigger picture? Because people actually do want to contribute. We just need to help them to see the bigger picture so that they can be also innovative and contribute with their ideas and help us along the way. So those are some of the ideal areas. One area that obviously is also needs to be mentioned is if things go a bit wrong, right? And that can also happen at any time. We might have misunderstandings, for example, or something's come up. So one important area of leadership is also the feedback loop. Namely, for example, if I've given someone an instruction or asked someone to do something and the work is not going as expected, then to have a joint feedback loop and to check in. Maybe I didn't explain myself correctly, or maybe the communication wasn't clear enough, just to check in and to align again the work of the whole team.
I have another example,
Mm-hmm.
a young leader whose power was undermined just because she was a female.
Yeah.
And some of her coworkers believed that she was chosen just because of her gender. How would you approach that? And would you encourage companies who promote females? Or would you find a different route for diversity in STEM careers?
Oh wow, lots of topics to take on. Let's start with the first question, namely, as a woman, if we're challenged, so I think you mentioned that the lady was challenged in the credibility of her competences, right? First of all, let's put this into relation. Unfortunately, that is something that's still happening a lot in IT and in the STEM sector in general. In fact, really, studies are showing that that's probably one of the most common challenges that's happening across STEM. And it's not an easy one. So I think the first step is to recognize, and that might lead sometimes to us feeling insecure about our qualifications, right? Because when we start being challenged or questioned, our competence is questioned, or maybe we're not being heard or recognized, then we start questioning ourselves and start thinking, well, maybe I'm not as good as I thought. And that's why I say we also need to be strong in our self-awareness to not fall into the trap to questioning ourselves. And that's really important. So we need the backup support to help us continuously stay on track and to believe in ourselves. The second aspect is that we also need to develop a relationship with those stakeholders that are important in our team. Because here is the thing, when we are in the minority, when we're the only woman in the room, the minority often gets overlooked. And it doesn't matter if it's you or if it's a different person or if it's another minority type. This applies not only to gender minority, it applies also to other minority types. And whenever there is a minority in the group, that's when there is a tendency for the majority to overlook the contributions of the minority. That's just a dynamic that we see whenever we have imbalances in group constellations. So what women can do is, instead of try to fight that group dynamic, is to rather focus on building the relationships with the individual colleagues, because it's in that individual relationships then we can show what contributions we can make, and that we can they get to know us, and we get to explain how we can actually make a difference. And the third aspect is exactly that, namely how to make a difference. I see sometimes young professionals working a lot and working really hard, but they're not focusing on those topics that actually move the needle, right? Because if I work really hard on something that's not actually helping, for example, to move the strategic positioning of the company or creating other additional core value, then my efforts are not going to be recognized. So what's important is that we also determine that our work, our efforts go towards the topics that are actually important for the organization or for our team. And for that, it's really helpful to have very close alignment with our leaders to determine what's the best output that's actually going to create critical value.
Critical value is a key component. Now, you mentioned one thing before, the first component in strong leadership is strong self awareness.
Mhm.
Can you delve into that topic and tell us how to build strong self awareness?
Mm. Ah, it can be a long journey. And I think, I tell you what, I think we continuously get to learn about ourselves, because as our career grows and as we grow with new challenges and new roles, we will always uncover new aspects of ourselves. But there are a couple of things that can help us to accelerate that process. So, for example, when I work with my clients, I use one tool that's called the UMAP tool, and that includes an aspect of Gallup Clifton strengths that helps you identify your top 5 strengths. And the way your strengths work is those are your natural talents that you can apply in the way you work. So some people have strengths that I would say are more analytical. Some people have strengths that are more relationship focused. So depending what your strengths are, your leadership can also be guided differently. So, for example, if you are a strongly analytical person, you might have a tendency to try and solve problems yourself through your own analysis. And if you're rather that's more relationship focused, then you might try and solve problems by, for example, creating forums, discussing with people, and try to come to a solution that way. So, understanding our strengths can help us to really determine what's the most natural way for me to work and also to lead people. So, what people can do to uncover their strengths is, for example, do some of those surveys that help you to uncover your strengths. But also, a really good way is to simply talk to the people you work with. Because here's one thing, we ourselves, we tend not to recognize what our strengths are, because the things where, or the areas where we are strong, they are so naturally easy to us that we often overlook them. We might not recognize them as a strength. So if you have a conversation with people that you trust, from work or from home, ask them, what do you see as a strength in me? And then you will see what they observe. And very often it might include areas that you're not aware of.
So you work on your strengths to create your strong leadership, but what about the weakness? Do you overlook? Do you work on them? What would be your advice?
Yeah. It depends in which areas those weaknesses are. Just the same way we have strengths, all of us have weaknesses. But I don't necessarily need to work on all weaknesses, right? It depends to what extent a weakness is relevant in my work. Generally, there is the philosophy that we can excel more by focusing on our strengths because that's where we're naturally talented. So rather than trying to incrementally improve our weaknesses, try to build your career based on your strengths. However, if there are certain areas where we might have weaknesses, of course, you can also work on them, particularly those that are very relevant to your role. Uh, I'll give you one example. So if you're in a role where you need to, let's say, continuously present results, and you find yourself having difficulties to present, or having difficulties, or maybe being nervous about presenting, and it is a core element of your job, then obviously that's also an area that requires some attention. And again, I would say go and get some help. There, depending what area you would like to improve, you can either look for a mentor or a sponsor or a coach, or if it's more a technical skill that needs a bit of brushing up, then obviously some courses as well, or specific tasks that help you to develop those skills.
We have a comment from Rashlin right now. Great show. Thank you, Pamela, for the advice. A really big help to us who's starting a small business. So, is there a different approach when you start a small business, or if it's a big business, you step into somebody else's shoes, or do you have always the same strategy? Watch what's around you and
Mhm.
apply what works with people?
Yes, absolutely. So you can use actually you can use exactly the same for small businesses as well. And I'll give you one example. Again, if you focus on your strengths, those are the areas that come naturally to you. So try and complement the areas where you're weak, maybe with support. And I'll give you one example. I'm not really good in writing. So I get support for someone who helps me whenever I need to write longer texts. So instead of me trying to really write long texts and spending a lot of time and maybe feeling depleted energetically because it's not an area that I'm good at, try and get support from someone who is very strong in that area. So, and this is part of leadership, right? Namely, recognizing that we don't have to do everything ourselves. A really important element of leadership is actually to learn to delegate. And the areas where we're really good at, we have a tendency to continue to do them ourselves rather than delegate. And the areas where we're not good at, well, that's maybe an area where we can try and bring in new team members or maybe service providers to help us with those rather than us feeling stuck in them. So, yes, to answer your questions, these leadership tips also apply very much to small business owners. And also the one about self awareness, probably, especially as a small business owner, if you are the brand yourself, then you're really showing what you stand for. So that self awareness about what are your values, what do you stand for, becomes quite critical as well.
Well, we had a great speaker before, and I just
Mhm.
am mindful of the fact that Guy Kawasaki was advising us to hire people who are better
Yeah,
in the skill set than you are. That way, you can definitely achieve much stronger company.
yeah.
And what would be your advice for especially for females? Wouldn't they be feeling a little bit depleted because they are not as um I don't know, dexterous or as advanced in their knowledge in the
Mhm.
management leadership role?
Mm. Um, I think a lot comes when you're early in your career, you're basically still discovering, right? You're discovering what am I good and what am I good at? What other skills can I learn? So I would say first go through that first phase of discovery to tap into the various areas of skills and learnings. But once you start to have a bit of a better feeling, the areas that are difficult for you, or maybe that you just don't enjoy, those are the areas where you can look for support. As I mentioned, you can either outsource them or maybe delegate because maybe the areas that you're not good at, someone else might be brilliant at. And there are a couple of ways how to go about it. Namely, on one hand, you can really just look at what do you enjoy doing. The second area is to understand which are the areas where you're naturally good at versus what you're not naturally good at. And thirdly, also have a think about, and this is now a really good step as we move from an individual contributor role towards a leadership role, have a think about which are the skills that you need to set on more focus in the future because they will increasingly become more important in the future. So, as a leader, you need to do less and you need to lead more. So, spend your time more on thinking about how do you want to lead your organization, your team, and your business. So you need to set aside more time for strategic thinking, business planning, risk management, but also, for example, managing relationships with clients and other stakeholders. So, as you need to spend more time on really leadership and management skills, you'll need to let go of some tasks as well.
What about people in your team who
Mhm.
are undermining your leadership role? How do you go about? How do you start to tackle that challenge?
Beata, that's a really interesting question. I think I would always start with empathy and I would try and find out what's happening because we all act and do something for a reason. So, a good way to start is by literally just having a conversation and starting to understand where the employee is coming from. For example, if you're someone who has just recently joined the organization, it could be that that employee maybe feels resentful because they were hoping that they would get the leadership role. Or another reason could be maybe the employees doubt your competences or something else. So I think it's really important to just lead with empathy and look to understand what's happening with the employee and what the reasons are behind it, because we just never know what's happening in the person's life. Maybe they're also just looking for a promotion because they need a better salary because something's happened in their family. So I would strongly recommend to have empathy and try and understand what's happening. Because once we know what is happening, that's when we can start offering solutions and alternative paths and collaborate together with them to see how we can help them.
Well, that's an ideal word, but as we
Mhm.
know, sometimes people are not going to tell us openly what's their problem, what kind
Mhm.
of problem they have with our leadership style. How would you go about? Would you fire that person or would you ask around why is that happening? What's Pamela's secret
Mhm.
sauce?
Well, you can always obviously also ask around 360 with other stakeholders what's happening with that employee because we just don't know, do they have just a problem with ourselves or do they have a problem with others? What's really important is to also understand what's the contribution of that employee. Because if we just see that overall also the performance is decreasing, then it's not just an issue of them not accepting our authority. Maybe it's a much larger issue of engagement and motivation. And then we can look into different paths. Generally, what I would say is I would really try and find what is the source of their concern and try to develop then a couple of alternative solutions. And that's then the alternatives that can be then discussed with the person. And then we can have a conversation that says, look, I'll just say your name. Look, Beata, I've recently noticed that you don't really follow my advice, and I'm not sure where this is coming from, but we need to work closely together in order to make this work. And if this is not the way that you would like to proceed, then here are a couple of alternatives, right? And the alternatives then can be discussed together. The alternative can be, let's find a way collaboratively to work together. Or alternatively, if the person feels like they no longer want to be part of the team, then maybe we can help them to find a position somewhere else in the organization. But ultimately, that conversation really needs to take place. And it needs to be a very frank conversation, right? Because what does not help, what really does not help, and it just becomes more difficult over time, is just to let the situation continue like that. Then it's not going to work out. So we actually need to have that very frank conversation with them about what's going on and put alternatives on the table.
Don't let the cancer develop. Take that time to have a conversation. How do you prepare for this kind of conversation, apart from taking some options and putting them on the table? What else do you advise? Because we are very often told that we are too emotional or too shouting or high-pitched voice. What would be Pamela's advice?
Mm-hmm. I think what's important is to go in with the right intention first. So just to check in with your energy. Because if we go in to the conversation with an energy that's already at a heightened nervous state, then we might maybe overreact, or we might, react in a way that's not fruitful. So first, check in with your intention, and I think the intention is, I have here an employee with whom I want to come to an agreement, and that's the intention. And I think the second point that's really important to go in with is to listen with a lot of attention. And when we listen, it's not about just listening to the words. It's also about listening. Why are they saying what they're saying? Or why are they asking certain questions? Really to try and understand where they are coming from. I think what is also helpful is sometimes we just cannot manage the evolution of the conversation. So if you ever feel that a conversation is getting really heated up, it's also worthwhile considering to just take a break and say, look, it feels like today we can't come to a conclusion. It's really good that we have started the conversation. Why don't we take away the points that we have discussed so far today, and we reconvene again next week, and we can have further elaborate on that. So it's okay to take a pause as well and to take a break, because sometimes we need to take points from a conversation, take them home, digest, have a think about it, and reflect. So that's also a way of how to take off the heat from a conversation.
Taking off the heat from the conversation, or putting on the heat, as Mick Sanders is just asking on how to warm up the relationship, how to strengthen your bond with your employees.
Yeah. One really important fact about people is we want to be seen. Yeah, we want people to see us as human beings, to understand our contributions and our value. So particularly when you have new employees, I'd recommend to spend time with them to get to understand them. So you could do that by, for example, having lunch together, and it's ideally in person. Of course, if you work remotely, you can also do that via online conferencing. But simply to spend time together and ask the questions like, tell me about you. I just would like to understand you. I would like to get to know you. What do you like doing? How did you progress through your career to come to this point? Get to understand the capabilities that they've built up, their preferred way of working, and so that you create that bond, so that later on, it's much easier to have a very honest conversation between both. And you will be surprised, many people don't have an opportunity to be listened to. So if you simply offer the space to listen, they will open up and they will share a lot about themselves. And in particular, they will share things that are important to you, for you as a manager to know. So just ask really open questions about them, be curious about them in a way that helps you to appreciate their contributions. And of
Can
course,
you
depending on the person, you can also spend a bit more time, especially when you have a team. You can have some team bonding activities that help also to develop a strong cohesion within the team.
can you give us an example of an open question?
Yeah. An open question can be, for example, one that I just mentioned was something like, tell me about your career development up to now. What are some of the core turning points that led you to where you are today? And that opens the way for them to highlight, the positions and the maybe key decisions that have led them to where they are today. Another important question, I think, is tell me about what you would like to do in this role. What are some of the things that you would like to learn, and what are the areas where you want to make a contribution? And I find that another third important question is, how would you like me to help you? How would you like me to work with you as your leader? How can I help you for you to be your best version here? And then just listen, because they will be mentioning what's important to them. So if we ask those open questions rather than closed ones, we really leave it up to them to share what's important to them and what otherwise they may not have an opportunity to share.
I love that because also you can talk about the troubles you're having with your
Yeah.
employee. For example, help me understand why is it that you're always turning up late at work?
Yeah.
And that way you can learn, for example, that they have to drop off their kids every day, and that's always a trouble for especially for young families who don't have support of their relatives.
Yes,
Now,
absolutely. Or other care responsibilities. I had a team member who had to take care of their partner, and who had to mostly work from home, because then that was easier for him to take care of his partner. So yeah, we cannot just make assumptions about people's lives. It's better to let them share, so we can really understand better how we can work together in a really collaborative way that works for both.
so empathy is critical for leaders, whether male or female, understanding what motivates people, what is happening behind the working environment,
Mhm.
definitely helps us know how to motivate your employees. Now, Pamela, tell
Mhm.
me, what was Pamela like 10 years ago? What is Pamela like now? And what Pamela, that is right now in front of us, would like to tell that Pamela 10 years ago? What would be
Mm,
the advice from Pamela right now?
yes, that's a beautiful question to ask, Beata. Um, 10 years ago, I think 10 or 15 years ago, I'll make that range a little wider. um, 15 years ago, I was right at the start of my leadership journey. And at that time, I believed that I had been placed in a leadership position because I was good in figuring out things on my own. So the leadership journey was really hard for me because I didn't ask for help, I didn't ask for advice. And I thought I had to figure it out on my own because, in my mind, that's what I had been promoted for. And that led to a couple of things. Namely, I was working a lot because I wasn't asking for advice. Secondly, I was feeling isolated because I wasn't including people into my world to consult, to ask for advice and opinion. And the third aspect was I wasn't working on my self development. I wasn't working on building a network, on learning maybe additional leadership skills. So I was actually trying to learn the very hard way, namely by doing. But the mistake that I made was to only stay in that. Of course, we learn by doing, but what does help us is to open up the gate and to allow in um, views from others, to allow ourselves to be vulnerable, but also to recognize that we don't have to do it on our own. And I think that's really the biggest advice I would give to anyone, particularly as you transition to a leadership role. Nobody expects you to manage that transition on your own because it is a hard one. It's very new skills that we have to learn. So today, the Pamela that you see today has learned from that. And what I focus on now whenever I step into a new area is to surround myself with the support, to recognize others have done this before. Therefore, I can learn from others, get the guidance, and above all, to recognize nobody's hiring me for something that I haven't learned yet. So I think accepting that there is a learning curve was a great learning at that time. But the second one is also to accept support and help and professional support, especially if we want to go through a learning curve quicker. And the third aspect that I've learned was that we also need to dedicate time and efforts for our own personal development. It doesn't just happen along the way, it actually also needs some dedicated time for that.
And also time to rest. How
Yeah.
important is for a leader to have specific time to rest?
Really important because you know what, as a leader, we can sometimes be pulled into very stressful situations. Sometimes we can just be pulled into different directions, right? A priority here, priority there, everything's important. So for us to remain calm and to be able to provide also that safe space to our team, we need to have an energy level and to feel grounded that allows us to be there for others. Because if we're already at a max, if we're max with our energy level, max with our patience, then it's going to be difficult to provide that space for others. So resting is important. And I think what we also need to learn is what's the best way of resting for ourselves, right? Because rest often is, some people think resting is just sitting on the couch, watching Netflix. That's rest. But we all have different ways of resting, right? It can be, for example, one way for me to rest is to go to not to museums because I really just love also a lot of visual stimulation. That's how my brain works. Other people also find and can re-energize through meeting people. They get energized by being in groups and spending time with friends and family. So find the ways of how you gain energy back, because that's then where you can spend your time on. And if you able to really identify the activities that that give you the biggest energy boost, then you will find that you can be much more focused on those activities. So instead of having to rest the whole weekend, maybe all you need is a specific time, whether it's for yourself, for reading, whether it's for doing sports, or a regular catch up with your friends. Just try to identify what's the activity that gives you the best energy. And yes, as a leader, that's what I mentioned earlier. Self leadership is really important, managing our energy levels and mental state, because that's what allows us to also make really thought through decisions.
Great conversation. That's what Olga Vasina says. Thank you, Beata and Pamela. How Pamela, do you suggest we best dedicate time to our own personal development, and how do we mix that in and out of working hours?
Thank you, Olga. That's a good question. So, in terms of personal development, once you have identified what are the areas that you would like to develop, have a think about where you can get external support for that particular area. So, it could be, depending on what it is, it could be a course, it could be maybe a mentor or a coach. Identify first what you would like to include. And then it's obviously ideally finding one that can be included in your current schedule, because we need to remain realistic about our working schedule. That remains, that doesn't go away. And try to find ways how to include that within. Another area that's really important as you go through personal development is to have reflection time. And that doesn't need to be long. You can, for example, schedule in your calendar 30 minutes on Fridays at the end of the day, or do it on the weekend at home. But take the time to reflect about the week that was and have a think about what were your learnings from that week? What are maybe situations that were difficult to manage? We've spoken today about a couple of challenging situations, maybe with team members. So you can just go through that situation again and reflect, how would you handle this situation differently next time? And maybe then discuss the situation with your mentor, or read upon it, or discuss with other trusted people. But I find that that reflection time on a weekly basis is really important, and it doesn't take long.
Leadership involves inspiring others to take actions beyond what they are capable of and guiding them in a positive direction. How do you guide them in a positive direction when, for example, in face of another pandemic?
Mm. There are so many new situations that we could be facing, right? Who would have thought that the pandemic would happen? And this is the difficulty for leaders. We cannot be prepared for all situations that might happen. And the pandemic was a great example of that. So, again, first of all, we can be prepared by managing our energy level. But the second question is, how do we lead our employees, our team, towards a positive future? I think it's about showing a growth mindset, because we will always find challenges, whether it's in the project work or the more general environment. So if there is a situation like, let's say, another pandemic, the question we can also ask ourselves is, what can we learn from this situation? Yeah, what can we learn from it? Because we can't avoid it. The pandemic was there. We all suddenly had to work from home and shift to work remotely, and not everyone was prepared technically for all of that, or organizationally. So the question is, what can we learn from that? And thereby stimulate a growth mindset and stimulate solution oriented thinking, because we will always have challenges. So I think the more we learn about how to adapt and how to find solutions to a new environment, the more we also prepare our team to accept any challenges that come ahead. And then we can always also celebrate milestones along and say, wow, we've been able to pivot. We've been able to send the whole team to work from home, to set up the equipment, and we've been able to manage through the pandemic, for example. So I think those are the key areas, namely to help our teams to adjust and adapt, but also to cultivate a growth mindset and a solution focused mindset.
And a positive mindset
Yeah.
for sure. Now, I wanted to ask you a key focus answer
Mhm.
for females who would like to be considered for leadership role.
Yeah.
How would you go about voicing the opinion that I want to be considered and I want to be taken onto this ladder?
Yeah. There's one one of my coaching clients recently. I asked her the question, "Do you even know who makes the decision about promotions?" Right? Because it starts with that. We need to be aware of what's the process for promotions, who is sitting in that room, who makes decisions, and obviously also start a conversation then with those people, the stakeholders, who could be your manager, who could be the HR department, but also maybe other departments if you're looking to grow into a new department. So there are a couple of ways how you can address that. I'll start with the most formal way, namely most employees have either a half annual review, performance review, or an annual review. And that is an ideal situation that you can take to, first of all, obviously recap what you've done in the past year, but then also to state, here's where I would like to move forward in the next year. And I believe I can make a contribution by, for example, stepping into a leadership role. And here's how I would like to contribute. And then start the conversation with your manager about what are the potential positions in there, and also what is your development along the way to get there. So that's one way. Take the formal route, I would say. But you can also continuously have that conversation. And this is why someone asked earlier, how can I create a better bond with my employees? So as an employee as well, you can ask your manager at any time, can we take some time to discuss, for example, my career? Invite them for a coffee, have just an informal conversation, and ask, what are the ways the team is going to develop? How's the organization developing? What's the new strategic direction? And then you can start a conversation of how you would like to make a contribution and how you would like to step up into a leadership role.
So is there a number one book you would recommend anybody considering leadership?
Oh my God, there's so many. There are many. But there is one book that I really recommend for anybody who is going to be a first-time leader. And it's one by Marshall Goldsmith, which is called What Got You Here Won't Take You There. And it really talks about when we start in our careers, we are an individual contributor. And especially in technical fields, we're obviously focusing on technical skills. But as we grow into a leadership role, we need to develop completely new skills and let go of some of the skills that have served us in the past. So that's a great book to read and to accompany you on that journey.
Great book. And now let's go into a great quotation. Let's start with Eleanor Roosevelt, and we can paraphrase it. Leaders are like tea bags. We don't know their true strength until they are in hot water. So
Yes.
in life, how are you in hot water, Pamela? How are you brewing?
How am I brewing? Interesting, right? And that's where it's good to be aware of our strengths, because when we're in hot water, we naturally go towards the areas that we know. So we naturally tend to deal with skills, deal with a difficult situation with our natural skills. So, for example, when I'm in hot water, when I'm in a difficult situation, I work a lot with relationships. So I will then go out to people that I know can help me out with different ideas, different opinions. And that's how I try to myself gather a 360 view of what's the problem, understand it, and have a better and more balanced view of what are potential solutions. Other people might deal with it differently, but I tend towards working through relationships.
Above all, don't fear difficult moments. The best comes from them, as Rita Levi-Montalcini says. And what about your favorite life lesson quote, Pamela? Is there one?
Yes, there is one, and I would say it's one that is attributed to Mahatma Gandhi, although apparently he has not said the exact words. And it is about he's attributed the quote, "Be the change you want to see in the world." And I like the slight change of the first word, namely, I like always to say, "Lead the change you want to see in the world." I truly believe that, and back to the positive mindset, I truly believe that each of us have the power to lead a change. And even if it's just in our small area, in our direct environment, we can change things. We can inspire others to be better. And that's why that motto really talks a lot to me, and that's why I mentioned that here.
Beautiful. Be the change, make the change. And what about your change? Who changed you in your career? Who had the biggest impact on your leadership style, Pamela?
Yeah, I think I had a lot of people who have supported me, many mentors, sponsors, and people. But I would probably say that the people who have supported me most along the whole journey were my parents, because they've always just supported me as a person. Yeah, they've never judged me, they've never, undermined me, and we all need that emotional support for whatever growth we have ahead.
Beautiful. Congratulations to your parents. They raised definitely a great leader. You're very calm and collected. I feel that positive and very composed energy from you, Pamela. However, I am mindful of the fact that we are running short of time and we had lots of questions today.
Mhm.
And also, we have the number one question that I started asking during the pandemic, and the pandemic is over. However, I would still want to know that that person that you would like to sit face to face and have a private breakfast somewhere in the world, where would it be, and who would you invite to have private breakfast with?
Yeah. Look, it would be two people that I haven't had a chance to meet. It's my two grandfathers. I haven't had a chance to meet them. So they were unfortunately long gone before the pandemic even. But yeah, I would have been really curious about getting to know them. One of my grandfathers was a serial entrepreneur. He founded a lot of companies, and the other one was a box champion. So I'm pretty sure we would have had some interesting conversations there.
That's wonderful to hear that you had such great role models in your family, and you still do, as you mentioned, your parents. Pamela, it's been wonderful to host you and learn from you how to become a composed and wholesome leader of the 21st century. We had great comments from Rashlin, Mick Santos, Olga Vasina. Thank you so much, everyone. Now, I would like to remind you that next Wednesday we are meeting with another great leader, great speaker, and we are going to have another special guest. Unfortunately, this time round, we just have a poster for this week. I'm sorry for the production. Oh, here we are. Next week, we are going to talk about how your professional brand affects your negotiation power with Gary Dozier. And that's it from today's Positivity Hacks Delivered. Thank you so much. Above all, trying is the first step toward failure. So don't stop from trying. That's my number one advice. If you want to become a leader, as the lyric says, I want to be a leader, don't ask, how do I lead? You just do it by trying. That's it from episode 104 PhD live stream. Thank you, Pamela Kellert, for great conversation. And to stay updated and ensure you never miss Positivity Hack Delivered, follow Woman on IT and turn on notification to be alerted once a video has been released. We are very grateful for another week, for another great achievements for leaders across the globe, whether it's females, whether it's males, whether they are behind the scenes. Like I'm thinking actually now about the wife of Mr. Zelensky. Do you remember her name?
I don't actually.
There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah, we should. Yeah,
Olena Zelenska is
yeah.
actually there and she's supporting her husband
Mm.
throughout the whole farrago. I'm just next to the what's been happening, and so I'm very aware of the fact that we are so often ignored, even though we are sometimes the neck of that head leadership head that is
Absolutely.
leading